Looking back, the signs were there long before I fully understood what was happening. Small shifts in her behavior that seemed insignificant at the time now painted a clear picture of her intentions. My wife, Claire, had always been meticulous, but over the past few months, her habits had taken on a new intensity. She started spending long hours on her laptop, closing it quickly whenever I walked into the room. Her phone, once casually left on the counter or coffee table, was now glued to her hand, and she had added a passcode I didn't know. At first, I chalked it up to stress. We both had demanding careers, and the pressures of work could easily spill over into our personal lives. But then there were other things I couldn't ignore. She became more critical, picking fights over minor issues and accusing me of not pulling my weight around the house. Conversations that were once warm and engaging became distant and transactional. When I tried to address the growing distance, she brushed me off, claiming she was just tired. The breaking point came when I noticed an odd charge on our joint account, a payment to a law firm I didn't recognize. "Hey, what's this?" I asked one evening, showing her the bank statement. Claire barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's nothing. I was helping a friend with some legal advice," she said, her tone dismissive. Something about her answer didn't sit right with me. Claire wasn't the type to involve herself in other people's legal matters, and the amount, thousands of dollars, was far too high for a casual favor. The suspicion I had been trying to suppress began to grow, a conversation that changed everything. A few days later, I overheard Claire on the phone. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but the words were clear enough to send a chill down my spine. "I'm just waiting for the right moment," she said. "I need everything to be in place before I make a move." She didn't realize I was standing just outside the room. My heart sank as I pieced together the implications of her words. That night, as I lay awake in bed, the reality began to set in. Claire was planning something that involved hiding information from me. Whether it was a divorce or something else, I couldn't afford to be unprepared. I decided then and there that I needed to protect myself. After overhearing Claire's cryptic phone conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was unfolding behind my back. The trust that had once been the foundation of our marriage felt fractured, and I realized I couldn't rely on her words alone. If Claire was planning something as serious as a divorce, I needed to protect myself, and fast. The first step was understanding the extent of what I was dealing with. Over the next week, I began quietly monitoring our joint accounts and financial activities. Every night, after Claire went to bed, I logged into our bank accounts, credit card portals, and retirement funds, meticulously documenting every transaction. That's when I noticed it. A series of small but consistent withdrawals from our savings account, all made in cash. The amounts were just under the threshold that would raise flags, but together, they added up to thousands of dollars. There were also unusual charges on her personal credit card, including one for a consultation with a divorce attorney. My stomach turned as the evidence piled up. Claire wasn't just planning a divorce. She was actively funneling money and resources out of our shared accounts. Knowing I couldn't navigate this situation alone, I reached out to a trusted friend, Greg, who was a financial advisor. Greg had always been someone I could rely on for sound advice, and I knew he'd help me figure out the best course of action. After explaining the situation, Greg leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "If she's consulting with a divorce attorney and moving money around, she's getting ready to make a move," he said. "What do I do?" I asked, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "You need to protect your assets," Greg said. "Start by moving any personal funds you have into an account she doesn't have access to. Document everything, every transaction, every receipt. And consult a lawyer as soon as possible." His advice gave me a sense of direction, a plan to focus on instead of wallowing in the emotional turmoil. The next day, I met with a family law attorney recommended by Greg. The lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Elaine, didn't mince words. "If your suspicions are correct, she's likely building a case against you," Elaine said. "That means you need to be one step ahead. Start securing your personal finances and gather any documentation that proves your contributions to your shared assets." Elaine also advised me to monitor Claire's actions closely. "Watch for any unusual behavior, but don't confront her yet," she said. "The more you know, the better prepared you'll be when the time comes. Over the following weeks, I followed Elaine's advice to the letter. I opened a separate bank account and transferred my personal savings into it. I also moved any valuable items that were legally mine, family heirlooms, important documents, and sentimental possessions, into a secure location. At the same time, I continued to document everything. I took screenshots of bank statements, saved copies of email exchanges, and even photographed receipts for household expenses. It was a tedious and emotionally draining process, but it gave me a sense of control in an otherwise chaotic situation. As I prepared for the inevitable confrontation, I began to see Claire in a different light. The woman I had loved and trusted for years was now a stranger, someone who was willing to manipulate and deceive to get what she wanted. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, I channeled my energy into preparing for the battle ahead. If Claire thought she could blindside me, she was in for a rude awakening. After weeks of meticulous preparation, I knew the confrontation with Claire was inevitable. The evidence I had gathered left no room for doubt. She was planning to file for divorce, and she was doing everything she could to gain the upper hand. But what she didn't know was that I was ready for her. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Claire's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen, her face briefly flashing with tension before she turned the phone over. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. "Claire," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." She looked up, her expression wary. "About what?" I took a deep breath. "About what's been going on. I know you've been meeting with a divorce attorney. I know about the money you've been withdrawing. And I know you've been planning to file for divorce behind my back." Her eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. "What are you talking about?" she said, trying to feign ignorance. "You don't have to pretend," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the screenshots I had taken of the financial transactions and the consultation fee for the attorney. "I have all the proof I need." Claire's face turned pale as she realized the depth of what I knew. "I can explain," she began, her voice trembling. "Explain what?" I asked, my anger bubbling to the surface. "That you were planning to blindside me? That you were siphoning money out of our accounts to set yourself up for a divorce?" She opened her mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it. Instead, she slumped back in her chair, her expression a mix of guilt and frustration. "What you didn't count on," I continued, "is that I've been preparing too. I've moved my personal assets into an account you can't touch. I've documented every transaction, every expense, and every contribution I've made to this marriage. If you think you're going to walk away with everything, you're mistaken." Claire's eyes flashed with anger. "So what? You're just going to leave me with nothing?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm going to make sure this divorce is fair. But I'm not going to let you manipulate the situation to your advantage. This is on you, Claire. You made the choice to betray me, and now you have to face the consequences." Her composure cracked, and she began to cry. "I didn't want it to be like this," she said, her voice shaking. "But it is," I said, standing up, "and now we have to deal with it." That night, I packed a bag and left the house, not wanting to spend another minute under the same roof as Claire. I stayed with a close friend, who offered me a place to stay while I sorted out the legalities of the divorce. The next day, I contacted my lawyer to inform her of the confrontation. "It's time to move forward with filing," I told Elaine. "I'm ready." The first mediation session was set 2 weeks after I left the house. In the interim, Claire had made several attempts to reach out, phone calls, text messages, and even emails apologizing for how things had unfolded. But I wasn't interested in hearing excuses or half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. I forwarded all her communications to Elaine, who advised me not to respond directly. "Let's keep everything documented," she said. "It's important to stay professional and focused." Walking into the mediation session, I felt a mix of nerves and resolve. This was my opportunity to set the record straight and ensure the truth came to light. Claire was already seated when I arrived, looking composed but noticeably tense. Her lawyer, a polished man with a sharp suit and a smug demeanor, sat beside her. He greeted me with a nod that felt more condescending than polite. Elaine and I sat across the table from them, and after brief introductions, the mediator, a neutral third party, began the session. Claire's lawyer wasted no time making his opening statement. My client has been the primary emotional and logistical contributor to the marriage, he began, painting a picture of Claire as a devoted spouse who had shouldered the majority of the household responsibilities. She seeks a fair and equitable division of assets, including a significant share of the marital home and financial accounts. I could barely contain my anger as he spoke, his words twisting the reality of our relationship into something unrecognizable. Elaine placed a calming hand on my arm, silently reminding me to let her handle it. When it was our turn, Elaine began with a calm but firm tone. We appreciate the opportunity to mediate this matter, she said. However, my client has evidence that challenges the narrative presented by the opposing party. We believe that the division of assets should reflect the contributions made by both parties and take into account actions that have occurred leading up to this filing. The mediator looked intrigued, sensing that there was more to the story than Claire's lawyer had presented. When it was time to delve into the financial details, Elaine methodically laid out the evidence I had gathered. She presented screenshots of the bank statements showing the unauthorized withdrawals, receipts for Claire's consultations with a divorce attorney, and even a timeline of the events leading up to the separation. The room grew tense as Claire's lawyer sifted through the documents, his confidence visibly wavering. Claire, meanwhile, stared down at the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Furthermore, Elaine continued, my client has taken steps to protect his personal assets, which were accrued prior to the marriage and are not subject to division. He has also documented his significant financial contributions to the household, including the down payment on the marital home, which was paid entirely from his personal savings. The mediator nodded, clearly impressed by the thoroughness of our case. These are compelling points, she said, addressing Claire's lawyer. Do you have a response? Claire's lawyer stammered, his earlier smugness replaced with visible discomfort. We'll need time to review this information, he said finally. As the session came to a close, Claire finally spoke, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. This isn't how I wanted things to go, she said, looking directly at me for the first time. I never wanted to hurt you. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. You didn't just hurt me, Claire, I said quietly. You betrayed me. And now we're here because of your choices. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. Instead, I felt a deep sense of closure. This wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for myself and ensuring that justice was served. After the mediation session, the tension between Claire and me reached a boiling point. Her carefully constructed narrative had been dismantled in front of the mediator, and the reality of her actions was laid bare. While I had anticipated resistance, the fallout was more intense than I expected. Over the next few days, Claire flooded my inbox with messages. Some were tearful apologies, others were thinly veiled accusations, and a few even bordered on desperate bargaining. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she wrote in one email. Can we just talk and figure out a way to fix this? But I didn't respond. I had learned the hard way that her words often carried more manipulation than sincerity. Her attempts at damage control weren't limited to private messages. Mutual friends began reaching out, relaying versions of the story Claire had told them. She said you blindsided her at mediation, one friend told me. She's claiming you're trying to take everything from her, said another. At first, the rumors stung. It was frustrating to hear her twisting the truth to paint herself as the victim. But Elaine had prepared me for this possibility. Let her talk, she had said. The people who matter will see through it, and the rest don't need to know your side of the story. Her advice proved to be true. Close friends and family who knew me well reached out with messages of support, reminding me that I wasn't alone. As the divorce proceedings continued, the cracks in Claire's facade grew more evident. Her lawyer's initial confidence had been shaken by the evidence we presented, and they began to approach negotiations with more caution. The financial discrepancies I had uncovered became a major point of contention. When the mediator pressed Claire to explain the unauthorized withdrawals from our joint account, her excuses ranged from implausible to outright contradictory. I was using the money for household expenses, she claimed at one point, only for the receipts to reveal luxury purchases and personal indulgences. The more she tried to justify her actions, the more her credibility eroded. One of the most significant moments came during a follow-up session when the mediator addressed the division of the marital home. Given that the down payment was made entirely from Michael's personal funds, the mediator said, "It's reasonable to propose that he retains ownership of the property." Claire's face fell, her frustration evident. "But I've lived there for years," she protested. "It's my home, too." "It was your home," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But you gave up the right to claim it when you decided to deceive me." For the first time, Claire seemed to realize the full weight of her actions. She leaned back in her chair, defeated. As the legal battles drew to a close, I began to feel a sense of clarity that had eluded me for months. The process had been exhausting, emotionally, financially, and mentally, but it had also been a necessary step toward reclaiming my life. In the end, the settlement was fair. I retained ownership of the house, my personal assets were protected, and the financial discrepancies Claire had tried to hide were accounted for in the division of assets. Walking out of the final mediation session, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I could see the path ahead clearly. With the legal proceedings behind me, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The storm that had consumed my life for months was over, and though the scars of betrayal remained, they no longer defined me. I spent the first few weeks after the settlement focusing on myself. The house, once a symbol of Claire's deceit, became my sanctuary. I redecorated, changing the colors and furniture to reflect my own style. Each new addition felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity. One afternoon, as I painted the living room a calming shade of blue, I realized how far I had come. This house, this space, was now entirely mine, free of the ghosts of the past. In the quiet days that followed, I learned to find joy in solitude. I spent mornings jogging along the trails near my neighborhood, the fresh air clearing my mind. Afternoons were for hobbies I had neglected during my marriage: photography, woodworking, even trying my hand at cooking. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. Many of them had reached out during the divorce, offering their support and reminding me that I wasn't alone. "You seem lighter," one friend remarked during a dinner gathering, "like you've left something heavy behind." I smiled, realizing they were right. As time passed, I began to reflect on the lessons I had learned through the ordeal. First and foremost, I realized the importance of trust, not just in others, but in myself. For so long, I had ignored the small signs that something was wrong, brushing off my intuition in favor of maintaining the status quo. Moving forward, I promised myself to listen to my instincts and prioritize open communication in all my relationships. I also learned the value of resilience. There were moments during the divorce when I felt like giving up, when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. But each time, I found a way to push through, leaning on the support of my friends, my lawyer, and my own inner strength. Most importantly, I came to understand the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. While I could forgive Claire for her actions, if only to free myself from the anger that had once consumed me, I knew that reconciliation wasn't possible. Some bridges were meant to be burned, and that was okay. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the chaos, it was all behind me now. The future felt open, full of possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine during the darkest moments of the divorce. I began to focus on my goals, both personal and professional. I took on new challenges at work, earning a promotion that opened doors I hadn't even considered. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding fulfillment in helping others rebuild their lives. Though I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship, I remained hopeful about the possibility of love. I knew that one day, when the time was right, I would find someone who valued honesty, loyalty, and respect as much as I did. For now, I was content to focus on myself, to continue growing and healing. To anyone who has ever faced betrayal, I want to say this: you are stronger than you think. The pain may feel unbearable now, but it will pass. And when it does, you'll emerge stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the future with open arms. Here's to new beginnings, hard-earned lessons, and the courage to move forward.